Good evening, everyone. I am Nomiki Konst, and I am filling in for the fabulous Francesca Fiorentini tonight. And it is an honor to be with you for what promises to be a crucial conversation about the fight for democracy. Now, I know Francesca would kick things off with her signature wit and righteous fire, but I'll do my best to channel some of that spirit because, frankly, we've got a lot to talk about and not much time to waste. On October 29th, we are calling all hands on deck for a national day of action to stop voter suppression and protect the 2024 election. We're sounding the alarm on something truly dangerous. 40,000 MAGA voter fraud hunters out there right now, targeting young people, Black and brown voters, and those in battleground states with mass voter challenges. This is a deliberate attempt to steal the election before a single ballot is even counted. And that's where we come in. We will be screening Vigilantes Inc., a powerful new documentary directed by the fearless investigative journalist Greg Palast and narrated by the fabulous Rosario Dawson. The film lays out how AI-driven voter purges and bogus fraud claims are being weaponized by extremists to silence millions of eligible voters. The stakes are real, and as Martin Sheen put it, if we don't act, we could lose everything. Our partners, SaveYourVote.org, the NAACP, Black Voters Matter, and more are mobilizing nationwide to fight back. We're calling on all of you to get involved, organize a watch party, share the film, and most importantly, check your voter registration. Because the fight for democracy isn't just about Election Day, it's happening now in every challenge to every voter's right to be heard. So whether you're tuning in through Free Speech TV, online platforms, or local events, your voice matters. We need everyone stepping up on October 29th, because if we don't defend democracy now, it might not be there for us tomorrow. So stay with us. Tonight's lineup is packed. You will hear from Greg Palast himself, along with inspiring voices like Martin Sheen, Latasha Brown from Black Voters Matter, and Gerald Griggs of the Georgia NAACP. Together, we will break down what's at stake and how we can fight back. So let's get to it, because if democracy is going to survive, it's going to be because of us. So let's go.
Bothers me to my core.
First up, we have an investigative journalist and contributor for both The Guardian and Rolling Stone. He has spent decades uncovering corruption and voter suppression across the globe. And today he is here to talk about his latest film, Vigilantes Inc., America's new voter suppression hitmen, which exposes the dark forces working against our democracy. Please welcome Greg Palast. Thank you so much, Greg, for joining us. This is such a powerful film. Can you tell us what inspired you to make it?
Stone cold fear. I have to say that I'm here in Georgia, where I just was at a Trump rally, and which could be retitled "Assault Rifles for Jesus," because these people actually believe that the Lord on high nominated their man, and if he loses, I talked to several groups, including the 3%ers, who actually said if Kamala Harris wins, we are picking up the gun. It's going to be, we're going to overthrow this government. They were absolutely direct about it. So we're talking about sheer stone cold planned violence, and we have more information on that. So there's violence. I'm very concerned about what's going to happen. And I made this film because I'm also concerned that the election will be shoplifted through a brand new Jim Crow technique, which was borrowed from a 1946 Ku Klux Klan plan. So we have a Trump plan, which is basically the Ku Klux Klan plan reorganized. And for the first time in half a century, there are mass challenges of voters of color by GOP operatives. Again, as you said, 40,000 GOP operatives have signed up to challenge voters. These are not government officials. This is a brand new thing where I can say, Nomiki, you don't really live in New York or wherever you're registered, so you can't vote there, and you have lost your ballot. This has not happened in half a century, and you're going to hear more from Gerald Griggs of the NAACP and Latasha Brown about this. I am very much afraid that the vigilantes, not the voters, will pick our next president. And I think we got a clip that
let's
introduce you to one of those
right now.
My husband is a huge Disney fan. And, oh, geez. Tom, you should have moved our ammo. There's our ammo. So my name is Pamela Reardon. I am currently 6th District Committee woman to the state party. So the last 2 years, I hit over 10,000 doors for President Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Did President Trump really lose the state of Georgia?
No.
Tell me why. Why do you think that?
Because I know for sure that voters have voted here and do not live here.
I got to give you this. This is, do you know this woman? Do you recognize that woman?
Not offhand.
You don't recognize her?
No, but
do you recognize?
If they were taking pictures with me with them, I mean,
I'm not gonna blame you if you took a picture with her. She's a very nice person.
I don't know. I don't.
Her name is Tamara Horn. Do you know Tamara? You don't know any Tamara?
I don't. The name's not familiar.
You're absolutely certain you don't.
I don't.
You never spoke to her?
No. No.
What about this guy and his wife on his honeymoon? See, there he is, just so the camera could see that he's on his honeymoon. But do you recognize that man?
No.
Interesting name. His name is Storm Saul.
And I suppose he was on the list.
Yeah. Did you ever speak to Storm Saul?
No, I told you already. I did not speak to the 32,000 people.
But okay. Well,
I can't even follow up on my own people that are calling all the time.
So you never call them, but you challenge their right to vote?
I'd have to go back and look at the list.
Explain that story. In fact, if I get the math right, you made 2 challenges. You challenged 32,379 voters, said don't count their ballots, or
No, just send them a letter to come in and prove that they live still in Georgia at that address.
Okay, I have a piece of paper from you. This is what you filed with the county, which said you are challenging her right to have her ballot counted.
No, I'm not.
It says right here, accept this letter as a challenge to these electors' eligibility to vote. Signed, Pamela Reardon.
I can't go through 32,000 people. I was handed the list.
You can't go through 32,000. Excuse me.
Through the vote, vetted these.
Have you ever heard of the Ku Klux Klan
Okay,
law
so
Have you heard of the Ku Klux Klan law of 1871?
I'm from Canada.
So you don't know the Ku Klux Klan law?
I'm from Canada.
Clearly you don't know Georgia law. The Ku Klux Klan law of 1871.
Get out.
Do you believe this woman shouldn't have her vote counted?
That has nothing to do with it.
Is this an attempt to remove a lot of Democrats, black people from voting to win the election?
I am far from that, sir. And you have crossed the line. You have crossed the line. Get out of my house now.
I shall get out of your house
before
now.
I throw you.
And you are sure that this is your legal voting address?
You are an asshole.
Thank you. They do have a rifle right next to the door, so believe me, I wasn't going to overstay my welcome.
So, Greg, that's jarring to watch. Can you give us a little background on how you were able to get inside access to her thought process, her strategy, and
how do we get in her home is the real question. Okay, this woman's in like this Gone with the Wind mansion. Now, now again, I want to remind you what you're looking at. This woman is not a government official, and she personally challenged 32,132 voters, mostly black people and a few young people that she threw in to get rid of. In other words, voters of color, meaning and the color's blue. Now, I was able to, so we got into her house. I won't say how, because we use undercover methods and fronts and everything else, something I do for BBC television. You don't do that on American TV. So we got in. But again, she had those loaded AR-15s and all kinds of weapons all over the place. And so my local camera crew, by the way, took off, fled for their lives. I don't blame them, but thank God for our combat experienced cameraman who stayed with me on this. But we were able to get her challenges kicked. And we were able to stop them through our investigations and working with NAACP and others. But we got counties where, for example, we got one guy who actually dresses like a vigilante, cowboy boots, cowboy hats, a 6-gun with a pearl handle and a holster, which he, by the way, said, that's loaded. This guy challenged 4,000 voters, almost all of them, are you ready? Black soldiers at Fort Benning, Georgia, now called Fort Moore. He challenged these soldiers, including one, Major Gamaliel Turner, one of the, as Rosario Dawson will tell you in Vigilantes Inc., he's one of America's top experts for the Pentagon on warfare of the future, as they call it. And they challenged this black soldier's vote and thousands of other black soldiers simply because they were assigned to other military bases. And believe it or not, even if you're assigned to Germany or Afghanistan or California, you're allowed to get an absentee ballot and vote as a soldier, even if you're a black soldier, by the way, even black soldiers. But they challenge all these black soldiers. And we, in the film Vigilantes Inc., by the way, you hear Major Turner, and he calls up, says, "Where's my ballot?" And he says the answer was, "Oh, Major Turner, no problem. Just come in. 2 days to the election, just come into our offices, prove you're an American citizen.
Oh,
and prove that you that you have a home in Georgia," which he does. And he says, "So you're telling me 2 days before an election that all I have to do is go 2,700 miles to prove that I, a career military officer, am an American citizen? That's what you want to, and I live in Georgia?" He says, "You talk to fools like that." He says, "I know what this is. It's Jim Crow. It's Jim Crow. It's no more than counting jelly beans in a jar." And they went after thousands. But here is the danger, as Martin Sheen will tell you later in this program. As of August, this time, they've already challenged 851,000 voters, almost all of them voters of color.
Wow.
And that was August. They are aiming, as Martin Sheen will tell you again, and you'll hear in the film, they're aiming to 2 million by next week, November 5. So we have to be vigilant. So we get these guys. And by the way, in the film, I actually have this guy who dresses like a vigilante. And oh, by the way, he's not, you might think he's a nutcase. He is the chairman of the Republican Party in Southern Georgia. And again, not a government official. He's challenging thousands of people. And we, again, already 851,000 challenged. What we did is you'll see in the film, we got the Vigilantes Inc. We had this guy who dresses like Doc Holliday, the OK Corral vigilante. We have him show up at the home of Major Turner, and the major whose vote he took away confronts him. You'll see that in the film. It's you're
giving it away. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, no. There's so many surprises in this film. That's like nothing. So what I wanted
to be the brightest people. But you have written about December 11th being an important date concerning the certification of the election. We all recall what happened on January 6th. So can you tell us why December 11th and a little bit more about the broader implications for our democracy that date has?
Look out for December 11th, because that's the new January 6th. See, Trump made a mistake by telling his MAGA units and the Proud Boys, come to Washington on January 6th. It will be wild, to try to stop certification of the vote. Under the Constitution, that's not when the vote is certified. You certify the vote. Each state certifies their electors, the winners, on December 11th. And these guys now have gotten sophisticated. They're going to try to stop that certification. And they even told me that they would stop it through violence. They're right up front. I told you, I talked directly with the 3%ers wearing their T-shirts with the AR-15s. This is no joke. And the violence is increasing. You'll see in the film, in Vigilantes Inc., we go to Texas, where vigilantes surrounded the house of the commissioner for Houston, the first black commissioner of Houston, Harris County, Rodney Ellis. They surrounded his house with guys with AR-15s. It's Texas, it's open carry. And then they chased a guy with an air conditioning truck. Oh, they said that Rodney had forged 750,000 ballots. And they chased the truck off the road. You'll see this in the film. They chased the truck off the road, grabbed the driver, put a gun to his head, and said, "Open up the back of the truck and give us those stolen ballots." He opens up the back of the truck. It's air conditioning parts. This isn't lone nuts. The guy who with the gun was paid $250,000 by right-wing Republican billionaires. One of 50 people that they hired with guns and detective badges to create mayhem and scare the hell out of voters. You'll see in the film, I go to Arizona, And by the way, you get where I meet up. I actually meet the QAnon shaman. He'd just come out of prison. He's being honored at this Kerry Lake rally. His horns were clipped though. But again, these guys are showing up like RoboCops at drop boxes in Hispanic neighborhoods. They're standing next to the drop boxes with loaded weapons. And they're also threatening, by the way, they're threatening to kill the Phoenix's election official. By the way, he's a Republican.
Right. I've heard that. Yeah. I mean, that's what's so crazy is I was listening to NPR the other day, and they were talking to a woman who was preparing for, just preparing for election day. And she was explaining all the usual things that they do, knowing very well that Alex Jones was there last time, intimidating. And then she says, oh yeah, and by the way, law enforcement is going to be on the roofs all around us with sniper guns. Like, what? So I wanna set up real quick. There's a clip about AI, and let's play that clip, and then you can give us a really quick follow up on how we can find this film. You have that clip?
Here we go.
Why is Georgia always seem to be creating the blueprints for vote suppression?
Well, we are the Deep South. We are the place where the Southern strategy began, both Georgia and Alabama. The new Southern strategy is beginning here.
In the 1960s, the GOP's Southern strategy included Operation Eagle Eye, challenging Black and Hispanic voters right in the polling station.
You may have heard of something called Operation Eagle Eye. Well, a better name for it would be Operation Evil Eye. One of its objectives is to frighten you and others by frivolously challenging your right to vote. It has been launched in nearly every state in the Union.
Eagle Eye recruits also patrolled certain wards of the city in mobile units equipped with two-way radios, ready to pounce on the nearest irregularity.
Spanish-speaking neighborhoods, go ahead. South on Pulaski. W9HGX Mobile is on the way with the Eagle crew.
Eagle Eye has returned as Eagle AI, utilizing artificial intelligence to modernize Klan-style challenges. A group of wealthy Christian nationalists has launched Operation Checkmate, a secret plan to use Eagle AI to challenge 280,000 voters in Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and Wisconsin.
They said that my address was a problem with my address, which it shouldn't be because I'm in the same county.
It sounds like a horror film, but it's real life, Greg. Thank you for doing this work.
Well,
can you tell people where to find it? And
yeah, first of all, and I want to thank a few people. I want to thank the Reverend Jesse Jackson and Rainbow Push for being central to getting out this film, and Leonardo DiCaprio, who set up a website launching it so you can get it for free at Save Your Vote, not Save My Vote, not Save Namiki's Vote, but SaveYourVote.org, and you can also check your registration there, and you can stream the film Vigilantes Inc. for no charge, or just go to gregpalace.com, where we also have all the links. But you can stream this film at no cost. And you just saw the great Gerald Griggs, the president of the NAACP. By the way, he's known best for putting R. Kelly in prison. He's a tough guy, but now he's coming out after guys with the guns. And that's what we're very, very concerned about. And challenging these sick challengers who are trying to take away the votes of every person of color through trickery that you'll find out in the film. This will terrify you and inspire you. So again, go to SaveYourVote.org or go to my site, gregpalace.com.
Thank you so much, Greg. I mean, just thank you for doing all this work and for having us all here today, just organized in one place, having these important conversations. And with that, actually, you mentioned Gerald Griggs. We're going to go to him right after this, but I just want to give a quick shout out to We and Goliath, the Progressive Democrats of America, MoveOn.org, and our friends at act.tv and freespeech.tv. But let's go to a quick clip from Vigilantes Inc.
But when Trump and Kemp talk about voters stuffing ballot boxes, they don't mean white voters. It's an old story. 100 years ago, there was a Ku Klux Klan propaganda film called Birth of a Nation. It showed a white actor in blackface sneaking in an extra ballot. The film was a huge hit. It was screened at the White House. And it convinced Americans that you had to have all these restrictions on black people or they'll commit voter fraud. Now today, there's a new film.
2,000 Mules, live from Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Former President Donald Trump, live on SalemNewsChannel.com.
It's the new Birth of a Nation. And once again, it says that black men, by the thousands, commit voter fraud. They vote several times.
This particular individual we have in a number of different locations. He's actually a mule. He gets out, approaches the box. When people walk up with intention to cheat, they look around, they basically walk fairly quickly, they try to stuff him in, they try to get out of there. In this case, he drops a few on the ground, pick them up, stuff them into the box. And then he hustles back and hustles out of there. So this is what it looks like.
All I see is a black guy putting a couple of ballots into a drop box. You know, folks drop in their family's ballots too, which Georgia law encourages. Now dig this. Every single drop box in Georgia has a security camera on it. And the 2,000 Mules guys say this voter has dumped ballots in 27 drop boxes, and they have the videotapes. But oddly, they don't show the 27 videotapes. They show the same tape over and over.
He needs a shoehorn. This is a smoking gun. This is O.J. Simpson being seen leaving the scene of the crime.
But they tell you they have something better than videotape.
What we're going to show you now, what kicks it up a notch is that we have the geospatial data to support the video.
They've got a very fancy scientific method to nail these black ballot stuffers. It's called geo-tracking. They track millions of cell phones. It's very scientific. They show satellites up in the sky and computer lights flashing back and forth, and these mules going from drop box to drop box. I mean, it's pretty convincing, unless you know something about geo-tracking, which is that you can't get closer than about 93 feet. So anyone within 93 feet of a drop box is a mule. Now, who would go by these same drop boxes every day? Well, how about we change the name of the film from 2,000 Mules to 2,000 Mailmen? Wow. So, did you see O.J. Simpson leaving the scene of the crime?
But let me tell you what I saw. You know, this is the complexity and the nuance of racism in America. That by the very presence of who he is, he's considered guilty. Because in the dehumanizing of black people, who the hell is he to think that he has the right to vote? The truth didn't matter. What they want was the image. And just them showing up alone constitutes something fishy and criminal-like is happening. That is the greater issue. And then to call a human being a mule.
Yeah.
A man who literally is getting out his car, doing his democratic duty to go vote, and to refer to him as a mule, I mean, full stop. Where do we go from there?
That was LaTosha Brown. She's going to be joining us a little bit later. But up next, we have our next guest, the current president of the Georgia NAACP, a civil rights attorney, Gerald Griggs. He has been on the forefront of the fight for justice in Georgia, from voter suppression to police accountability. Thank you so much. Let's give it up for Gerald Griggs. We really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So at one point in the film, you talk about these tactics being Jim Crow 2.0. What does that mean, and how are you and what are you doing to fight back?
It means that we're seeing the re-energizing of voter suppression and new tactics. So it's not the poll taxes and literacy tests or the number of jars, the number of bubble gum in a jar. It's actually voter IDs. It's voter purges. It's prohibiting folks from having water and food while in line. It's attempting to make sure that individuals who are not viewed as American don't have the access to the ballot. So what we're doing is using the same tactics that were used in the past 50 years ago, litigation and legislative change, to make sure we protect individuals' right to vote. So if Jim Crow has become James S. Crow Esquire, we have a new legion of lawyers who are being Thurgood Marshall and making sure we take it apart.
Can you tell us a little bit about the KKK Act and how that's applicable to this?
Well, you know, you have people trying to intimidate voters. And so there was a law passed right after Reconstruction to prohibit that. And we are using that particular law to go after these vigilantes who are trying to stop individuals from exercising their constitutional rights, especially at the ballot box. So if you use fear and intimidation and violence, you can be prosecuted under the KKK Act. And we are using that as well as other legal tools on the federal level to prohibit this type of conduct.
I'm so curious, especially post-Trump, when you're making these legal challenges, I assume you're brushing up against a lot of conservative justices that have been appointed under the Trump administration. How is that playing out? And honestly, I mean, the election's in a week. Do you have enough time in some of these situations to get an injunction or to stop folks if it's challenged to a higher court potentially?
Absolutely, because there are certain things even the most conservative of judges have to follow, and that's the law. When you have the Voting Rights Act, when you have the Civil Rights Act, when you have concrete black letter law, even justices who are on the far right will have to bend back to the middle. And so even in the voting rights space, we've seen the Supreme Court itself back voting rights and back Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So we're not worried about activist judges. As long as they're following the law, we've been successful in the 11th Circuit, which is the most conservative circuit. We've been successful in the Supreme Court. But most importantly, we've been successful in state courts, which have more rights. Because again, the Constitution is the floor of rights, but the state constitution and state statutes are protected. Hence what we saw with the rogue Georgia State Election Board and it being struck down not only by a trial judge, but now by the Supreme Court in this state. So we're not worried about activist judges or conservative judges. The law is the law and it will apply.
Are you learning anything through these cases? I mean, I assume you're doing this very quickly, but has there been a situation where discovery is opened up and you found out a little bit more about their methods and how they organize and the funding, or all the interesting things you learn in a court case?
Well, as you know, the NAACP is nonpartisan, but it is interesting when we file these lawsuits, who intervenes. It's always one party intervening. And so if we're talking about increasing access to the franchise, my question would be, why would the GOP, both on the state level and the RNC, be intervening on the side of the state, which is trying to suppress the vote? So we have learned through discovery where the funding is coming from, who the major players are. And again, as we move to trial, that will become public. But my concern is for individuals who say that they are originalists and believe the Constitution should be applied the way it's written. Why are you intervening on cases that you clearly see there's an act to suppress the right to vote of women, of minorities, of anybody other than rich white men?
Which is basically their voting base right now. They've made that very clear. The DOJ, are they doing anything about this?
They are doing something. We would hope that they would do more. But there are organizations like the NAACP, like Black Voters Matter, like the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, that will stay on the front lines. We believe that these are violative of people's constitutional rights. We are hopeful that the DOJ will bring more cases, but currently the Georgia State Conference and other branches of the NAACP are bringing cases. Black Voters Matter is bringing cases, and so many others. Mark Elias and his group are bringing cases. So the individuals that you would expect to be on the front lines are on the front lines. We would hope the DOJ would join us and be more active in prosecuting these cases by using Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Even though Section 5 was gutted by Shelby County versus Holder, they can sue after the like in Texas, Senate Bill Warner in Georgia, SB 202, after it's been passed, to stop it from being implemented.
So along with the DOJ, I mean, the FBI has been actively investigating organized white supremacy in this country. And I mean, I hear this and it just sounds like it's some sort of offshoot of whatever investigations they've been doing. Have you heard anything on their end in terms of, have they flagged potential threats? I mean, you're seeing it play out in court, and obviously in this film, it's been made very clear, but have they made any sort of statements or warnings?
Well, the director of the FBI, who's from Atlanta, Christopher Wray, said the biggest threat to the homeland is homegrown white nationalists. So they've made those type of statements, but I don't know if they've been forceful enough in pushing back. You hear about these armed individuals that are going to be at the ballot boxes and at the election doors. That needs to be stopped. You don't need individuals trying to intimidate others. And so we know that there's a rise of white nationalism in this country. We need law enforcement and those that are charged with upholding the law to be more forceful in their pushing back. You know, I was listening to Greg a few minutes ago talking about the Proud Boys and 3%ers. We have a place for individuals like that. It's called federal detention. It's called the Department of Corrections. In Georgia, if anybody tries to intimidate somebody or hurt somebody else, they can expect to be spending a large amount of time in the Department of Corrections. We need to actually be about law and order. Let's talk more action. So I think that there needs to be action on that front. If people are espousing terroristic threats, if they're espousing hate that turns into action, they need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But currently, it is more of the organizations doing the work than our government pushing back on this type of conversation and action.
I gotta say, with that, there is undoubtedly some sort of skepticism, at least maybe fear at most, of some law enforcement, as there's been law enforcement investigated for, you know, white supremacy internally. It's not all of it, but there has definitely been some investigation. Do folks on the ground, are you hearing whether or not they trust law enforcement to intervene if there is such a situation?
I think they trust trusted messengers to push back, as NAACP has been doing for 115 years. And our hope is that many of our partners in law enforcement who truly believe in the rule of law will step forward. This is not a time for fear. This is not a time for shrinking back and being shrinking violence. It's a time to make sure that the will of the people is heard, that the rule of law prevails, and that a democracy is truly democratic by allowing everyone that's legally able to vote access to the ballot, and not restricting that through these draconian voter suppression laws, which are in fact Jim Crow 2.0.
Gerald, thank you so much. This is, the work you're doing is incredible, and it's so important for communities across the country. We're just very honored to have you and for you to share your work in the film. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We have an incredible show ahead coming up. Stay tuned for Tom Hartman, LaTosha Brown. We may have Attorney General Keith Ellison on. He's been very busy at different events. And we are going to show more powerful clips from Vigilantes Inc., which you can watch for free at saveyourvote.org. And one more thing, there is a Move On. I'm being told that moveon.org has a petition demanding Congress certify this election. You can go to moveon.org/certify election. Next up, we have Max Carver. He's an actor known for his roles in Desperate Housewives, Teen Wolf, and the recent film in the Batman franchise. Max is also an activist who made the journey to Standing Rock to stand in solidarity with Indigenous rights. Please welcome Max Carver.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Max. We really appreciate it. So I got to ask you, conservative critics called the Batman too woke. Was Paul Dano's portrayal of the Riddler a commentary on the reactionary people who feel betrayed by political elites, with his followers gatherings on fringe platforms and echoing the rise of online radicalization, conspiracy theories, and all that extremism that's often linked to the right?
That is a tough question. I can't speak for Paul. I can't speak for Matt. But it was certainly a depiction of where things feel like they're at today. And you know, what I see and what I'm hearing today and what brought me here today is this to me it's a nonpartisan issue, as was said. This really is an attack on democracy. And, you know, there's a Princeton study that there's a zero correlation between the will of the people and what actually gets put into policy. There's multiple studies where 87% of districts are uncompetitive when it comes to voting because of gerrymandering. So when we're talking about states like Georgia or these states that will ultimately determine the election because of the electoral college process, and an attack on voters to wipe hundreds of thousands of people from the voting rolls, it's just unconscionable. So we're having this conversation publicly about what America's values are. And to me, we can just boil it down and distill it into, ideally, it's about a representative democracy. So these highly organized groups, violent groups, whatever you want to call it, that are well-funded, it's strategic. These aren't individual actors who aren't being held accountable for this to be part of the rhetoric at play right now, where this is acceptable. It's terrifying. And I'm glad everyone's on this call today and we're bringing attention to it first and foremost. But my next question is what do we do about it? Is there a way to cure these ballots? is that going to have an effect in the amount of time that we have? You know, this is all hands on deck. And I know Greg from back when we worked on some campaigns together, and this was an issue he raised 9 years ago and before that. But this is urgent. We're talking about something that's going to take place in the next week, and I'm terrified that it's going to get violent. And this is just people. These are folks just trying to vote.
It's interesting. You know, I drew that analogy to the film because so much of this has been instigated by preying on folks on the internet through propaganda, through these algorithms that are disproportionately moving to the right, and suppressing, you know, people of color and women, the voices. I mean, there have been lawsuits against, you know, the big tech companies. Google hired somebody actually to investigate bias and then fired her, Timnit Gebru, when she reported that there was indeed bias in the algorithm against people of color and women. And now we're seeing this play out in real time as this propaganda is spreading at, you know, a rapid rate, especially with Elon Musk's X now. So how, I mean, from your perspective, I mean, it's a long journey. It doesn't happen overnight. I mean, folks might be watching one YouTube show and then 10 years later, they're storming the Capitol, or 8 years later, storming the Capitol, or what's happening right now. Do you have any sort of ideas, thoughts on what we as Americans can do to push back, or potentially our lawmakers?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, with regard to social media, the way I see it, and I'm not an expert in this field at all, is that essentially if I'm outraged by something, it's going to heighten my emotions. I'm going to keep watching it. And I have this little device that's going to record how long my eyes are on that. And it's going to go, great, we just made some money off this guy. Let's keep rolling more of that content. So when we boil it down, for me, this is about money in our elections. And this is about not having rules and regulations around that. We talk about dark money pools. We talk about astroturf movements where you have huge funds backing the kind of vigilante stuff we're talking about today. But, you know, my understanding, I've been looking at a couple ballot measures in Colorado and Nevada right now and supporting those. They're about ranked choice voting and ways to just make elections more fair. My understanding is that as of tomorrow, we can no longer post, which I kind of appreciate, that there's supposed to be at least some kind of block on what can be put forth and what's out there. But really, you know, what this boils down to for me is just, how do we repeal or take money out of elections? Because there's a return on investment when this kind of stuff comes into play. And our politics should represent, for the most part, I believe, the will of the people. And right now that's not the case. And in terms of younger generations, there's a sense of powerlessness around that and feeling disenfranchised and a lack of will to participate, which is exactly as it's designed at this point.
I mean, you're an actor, but you're also an activist, and you've been an activist for a long time. I mean, you as a citizen activist in this country, how are you feeling in this moment, leading up to the election? As you said, we're not going to be able to post, but as an activist, like, what do you feel like? What are your avenues? Where can you go to organize now? It just seems like every day they're cracking down a little bit more, and it's harder for folks to push back.
I mean, for me, I believe fundamentally in fairness, and for people to want to participate in our democracy, for it to be fair and free elections. How do we participate today? Looking at the map right now, there are a couple regions which are going to dictate how this goes. So whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, it's really, you know, I used to knock doors, and that's how I learned what was going on. That's how I had conversations with people. And typically it would look like this. There'd be a lot of fiery language. Who are you here to support, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what I found knocking doors was that when it came down to the three things you cared about most, wasn't about policy, it wasn't about party, we could have a conversation. And when it comes to issues like this, where people are getting wiped from the rolls based off of race, based off of gender, based off of where they live, it's really having a conversation about what do you value most. And for me, it's why it's a nonpartisan issue. This is about preserving our democracy. That's it. It's something that anyone on any side of the political spectrum should be impassioned about, particularly if there's a tagline around "Make America Great Again," because what's happening right now is fundamentally un-American. I don't consider myself an activist. I'm just a guy, and I'm pissed off because this is not how it's supposed to go. Period.
I mean, here, it's breaking apart families as we know, and it's definitely breaking apart the fabric of this country. And if I can just add just one little line to pivot off of that, having conversations with family members who might have gone down those propaganda rabbit holes, because, as we saw with January 6th, a lot of those guys who were taken in by law enforcement ended up regretting it and somehow getting out of the propaganda extremist space and seeing the light. So, I mean, I don't think it's too late for folks to speak to their family members if they've gone too far. It is those conversations. So really, really appreciate your work in this. Where can we follow you now? What are you up to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of what matters to me right now, aside from this is a super urgent, pressing issue. Is there's certain ballot measures across the country that are about ensuring this kind of stuff doesn't happen, and for making elections kind of more fair. One of the things that I'm passionate about is if you can get cities, counties, and states to start pushing measures for ranked choice voting, increasing voting times, etc., where people can actually get off of work and go to vote, where you no longer have these other ridiculous laws about ID checks, etc., on the local, municipal, county, and state level. There's a threshold that you can pass, and it happens with most movements, where if you have enough of those cities, counties, and states pass those measures, it becomes a federal issue. So obviously we're looking at a national election. We're looking at stuff going on within the states right now, but it's really important to support policies. In Nevada, there's one that's question 3, which is ranked choice voting. In Colorado, it's 131, yes on 131. Those things are critical because for me, regardless of your party, I'm not going to get into that. I'm very opinionated, but if you care about the soul of America and preserving democracy, no one wants corruption. We want our politicians to represent the will of the people, and anything that goes against that is we're ensuring the demise of what we're so proud of here. So,
Max Carver, thank you. So well put. Couldn't have said it better. Thanks for doing all of your work for us.
Thanks to everyone here, and thanks for having me.
All right. Joining us now is a longtime activist and director of voter justice for SaveYourVote.org. He is also the author of Be the Revolution, How Occupy Wall Street and the Bernie Sanders Movement Reshaped Politics. Dear friend, great book. Let's welcome Jay Ponte. Do we have Jay?
Hey, Nomiki.
Hello.
All right.
So tell us about SaveYourVote.org, Jay.
Yeah, so very honored to be here and part of this initiative. It was launched with the help of Leonardo DiCaprio, his father George, who is an executive producer on Vigilantes Inc, the film. Yvette Nicole Brown and Jesse Jackson were also a big part of it. And it's a website. It's a website that is devoted to creating information for people so that they can not only watch the film and find out what's happening, but find out the things that they can do about it to safeguard their vote and this democracy.
So in your book, Be the Revolution, you actually wrote a chapter about QAnon and the Stop the Steal movement. Would love to hear your perspective a little bit more about how we, got to this existential point.
That's a great question. It's a really, really important topic because it has to be understood that this is, and again, this is not about a partisan issue. Neo-fascism is a global movement. This is a global movement happening around the world. And you have to understand that the voter base, the demographics in this country have been shifting over the last decade. The right knows this. Previously, they could use wedge issues like guns or they can mobilize the Christian nationalists to get out votes. But of course, their demographics are shrinking, so they had to find different ways to mobilize voters without actually promising them any policies that would serve them, so that they can stay in alignment with ALEC and their corporate masters, essentially. So Jerome Corso, an operative, was one of the first to discover the Obama birther conspiracies was a way to get people really excited. And then they saw that the online engagement with initiatives like QAnon, which happened as a decentralized effort at first, but then MAGA operatives got involved and saw the huge potential, and eventually 33 million people actually believed that in these conspiracy theories that people were like celebrities were drinking blood for immortality. I'm not kidding, this is real, and this was all part of a coordinated mobilization leading up to January 6th, which was very close to being a real coup. And of course, they are now pushing the narrative that it didn't happen, right? So gaslighting is always a tactic of the oppressor.
That indeed, I think we're all becoming experts on gaslighting and how to recognize it. I want to show a message from the heart from actor Dash Myhawk, who you may remember from the hit show Ray Donovan, a great show. Let's play that clip real quick.
Hey everyone, this is Dash Myhawk, actor, activist, whatever you want to call it, but I'm urging you to go and watch Vigilantes Inc. It's a really powerful historical film about how mainly the far right is disenfranchising black and brown voters in battleground states, and the history of Jim Crow and way before that. It's fascinating. I showed my kids. You should show yours. This isn't about partisan politics. It's about truth, and it's about people having their own right to choose as human beings, no matter who they choose. So go to saveyourvote.org or gregpalace.com and watch Vigilantes Inc. You'll be better for it, I promise. Lots of love.
Jay, you have so much support. SaveYourVote.org has really been able to pull in this great movement of folks in this final stretch before the election. People like Dash and others on this call. What can folks do right now if there's a call to action for people at home? You're thinking 1 week left. How do you fight militias? How on earth can someone like me just at home do anything?
Well, that's a great question. So we've been reaching out to some of our cultural influencer supporters like Max and Rosario Dawson and Martin Sheen and Dash Myhawk, good friend. And we really want people to go to saveyourvote.org. Saveyourvote.org, check your registration. Okay, if there's any problems, go vote early, make a plan. And unless it's absolutely necessary, do not accept a provisional ballot. Do not accept a provisional ballot unless you absolutely have to.
Explain why. Sorry to interrupt. Can you explain why to folks? Just their aware.
Yes, because they're going to try to give provisional ballots, which very possibly are not going to be accepted. So if you want your vote to count, and if there is an issue, you can call 1-866-OUR-VOTE. All this information is on the SaveYourVote.org website. 21 states have same-day registration, but mostly we need people. Now that what MAGA has done is they have empowered 40,000 vigilantes to challenge these votes. We must do the same thing. So this is not a partisan issue, though. This is about democracy. So call all of your friends in battleground states, call orgs, call your senator, spread the link to saveyourvote.org, tell them to watch the film, tell them to look at the calls to action, and ultimately write that number down, 866-OUR-VOTE, which is on the website. And it's really up to us. It's really up to us. We can't trust that anyone else is going to do it for us.
Would you recommend folks early vote or same day vote? Is there a difference?
Definitely try to go early, because there are about 850,000 people who right now their status could be in jeopardy. And we're talking legal voters They're pushing conspiracy narratives about voter ID, about fraudulent votes. Trump has been lying, straight up lying. And right now, they're using this as a tactic. They know what they're doing. And it's really important that you try to vote early if you can, so that you can see if there's a problem. You can contact, you can contact your city and state officials, but you can call that number for 1-866-OUR-VOTE. So go to saveyourvote.org.
And if they say to you, hey, guess what? There's an issue with your registration, or there's an issue with something, we need to get you a provisional vote. I've had that happen to me before, and my vote wasn't counted. I was in New York, guys. So that's how serious this gets. The former attorney general was investigating it a few years ago. But if they say that to you, what do you do? Is that when you make the phone call?
Definitely make the phone call for sure. Write down that number. There are there's 52 million Spanish-speaking people. There are definitely Spanish-speaking citizens. So there's API number. There's a number in Spanish if that's not your first language. But definitely write that number down. Call immediately if you have a problem. But it's really important to spread the word. Don't think anyone else is going to do it. Take the link and share it with everybody you know, if that makes sense.
This is such great information, such good work you're doing. Jay, thank you for sharing this. Anytime there's an issue at the polls, you should really have a number to go to. And I'm glad that you guys provided that, because this is unfortunately not a new game.
Yeah, and I'm excited for Latasha.
Thank you so much.
Who has been doing incredible frontline work. So these are the folks, Mondale Robinson have been doing amazing work in the trenches. So we're just here to uplift and support the people who are really on the front lines, Gerald Griggs and the NAACP and all these amazing frontline orgs.
Speaking of Latasha, we're honored to introduce her. She's up next. We're honored to have a powerhouse for political empowerment. She's the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. She's an author, an activist, and a singer who has been working tirelessly to fight for democracy and make sure that every vote counts. She was featured on the 2024 Forbes 50 over 50 impact list. That's a tongue twister, though. And she's received prestigious accolades such as Glamour Magazine's Woman of the Year in 2021. I am so honored. Please welcome Latasha Brown.
Hi, how are you? I'm happy to be here.
We are incredibly honored to have you, Latasha. So you've been on the front lines. Let's just get to it. What do people need to know right now?
No, people need to know right now, we have only a few days left in this election cycle. There's a couple of things that I want people to really recognize. That one, this is the moment right now. This is going to be a defining moment in political history in this country. And so one, while these terrible things are happening, while we're seeing this voter suppression, as we're seeing these vigilantes, we have to recognize it's more of us than it is of them. And that we can really overwhelm this process by showing up and sending a reprimand to those that seek to actually lead voter suppression. Is that's simply not acceptable. That this is a democracy, and this is an America we see that is literally based on this idea that all people are created equal and endowed by their creator, and that ultimately that we should have free and fair elections and have the opportunity to participate. And so I think it's important for us to stay diligent in recognizing what is happening in this moment and fight back. Part of what has happened in Georgia is a judge just on last Friday, that if you have been following what has been happening in Georgia, as Greg raised, the voter suppression has not stopped. But what we've seen, even as recent as a few weeks ago, as recent as a month ago, we have this board of elections, the state board of elections, that passed these new rules, that wanted to actually pass this rule that said that you had to do hand ballot. You had to count the votes by hand. This is 4 or 5 million votes, which they know would make the process just be incredibly difficult. In addition to that, it would actually shift up the certification and delay the certification process. And so with just a constant organizing and informing people about it, what we feel is goodwill has been raised up to the point that even most recently we kept fighting. Most recently on last Friday, there was a judge ruling that said that no, that there was a stay on that absolutely that rule would not be enforced this election cycle. But we keep seeing it come over and over and over again. And one of the ways that we can actually make sure that we don't have to continue to deal with this, not at the same level of intensity, is we've got to stop it, and it has to be consequences. which is why we have to come out in record numbers and send a declarative message that we are not only are we not going back, we're not going to tolerate people literally trying to take us back to 50 years ago or 60 years ago, or literally try to mess with our vote. So I think that's important. The second thing I think is important, it's the underlining kind of narrative in this story, and we have to hear it, is racism. We have to fundamentally deal with racism in this country that we have all created, that literally this process has been created because we've allowed racism wherever racism lives in this country, not just a racist. We've been looking at racism as like individual acts, like, oh, it's been this act between one person and another person, instead of literally looking at how structural racism is embedded in every single system in this country. And we have to take the responsibility to uprooting that it will not be resolved on one election, but we have to make a declarative message in this election, but we have to do the work to uproot racism. We have to do the work to uproot those that seek to actually benefit and exploit racism as a tool to try to win elections. And so I think in this moment, we have to focus on winning. We have to focus on, and what does that look like? That looks like every single person being able to freely and fairly literally cast their vote without chaos and confusion, without the fear and the threat, without being encumbered by these rules and these administrative rules that make it more difficult. And then the other thing I think is really important, that our work won't just get finished on November 5th, we have to also continue to fight for the restoration of the Voting Rights Act. If the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act, if both of those things, which Kamala Harris has actually made a promise that those two things are priorities for her, that if those two things are put in place, what it does is not only it restores the Voting Rights Act, but it also literally creates a more level playing field around voting rights and normalize it all around the country, so that regardless of whether you live in Alabama or you live in Chicago or you live in California, that you will have equal access to the ballot with the Freedom to Vote Act.
You know, you talk about this racism and the laws that are restrictive and been on the books and taken off the books, and here we are in 2024 fighting all over again. Then you've got the voter ID narratives Elon Musk is pushing online. And I think just today, Donald Trump was talking about paper ballots. Can you explain some of the counter arguments? Because, you know, for folks who may not be rooted in history and understand the voter ID laws, they might think, oh, why I have an ID. I have to use an ID to drive my car or purchase alcohol. You've heard the comments. Yeah. So can you help us? I mean, we might run across people like this, well-meaning folks who say, I think that voter IDs make sense. So what's the counter narrative? What's the history? And if you can add in some about the paper ballots as well.
So, you know, a couple of things. One, let's talk about what voter suppression is. There's a spectrum of how voter suppression happens, but I usually say that there's been three major core strategies that have been used for voter suppression. One has been weaponizing the administrative process. That's creating something that seems like it may seem harmless, but it's some little administrative piece that literally creates an additional barrier. Anytime there's an additional barrier for people to vote, that is a form of voter suppression, right? We all don't have access the same way. It has a financial space to it. It has an access piece. Some people work from 9 to 5, or some people don't have the opportunity to stand in line for 4 and 5 and 6 hours. And so there's one vein of strategy that is really related to weaponized administration process. There's another strategy that's literally around creating a process that seems harmless and legal, like, quote, a voter ID, right? That in itself, having a voter ID, that in itself is harmless. But what we see is that can be, in some states, that's been interpreted how the state legislature wants to interpret it. For example, in Texas, where the students that go to a predominantly Black university have a state ID that is literally connected to their university, that for some reason that ID is not being able to be used, but you can use a gun license. That in many ways, yes. So in many ways, it's been very subjective. So that for some people, it's easier than other people. That in itself, it's like that in itself becomes a barrier. Then the third barrier has really been created around creating chaos, confusion, and fear, to weaponize this idea of intimidation and fear. We saw that in the 60s in the form of burning crosses. We see that now recently in burning mailboxes and harassing people, like we see harassing poll workers. And so those have been the strategies. Even something as simple about, you see a ID, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. If we can shave off a few votes here, we can shave off a few votes there. In Alabama, which is my native state, in Alabama, a few years ago, that they were seeking to close down the DMV offices. Where do you get your state ID? You get your state ID from these DMV offices. But the state ID of the 12 counties that were literally, of the 67 counties in the state, there were 12 that were closing the DMV offices. Every single office was in a county that was majority African-American. So why those 12 out of 67? So something that seems harmless, we've got to have a little more discernment, and something that seems harmless on one end, that on the other end, it actually can create, and literally is death by 1,000 cuts. We look at literally the indigenous community in Arizona, an indigenous community in places that they may not have a physical address. They may have a post office box because of their reservation and where they live. That is not acceptable for them to be able to register. So we have to stop looking at these things that seem like they're harmless. They're not harmless. Anything that does not make it accessible and easy accessible for people to vote, it creates an additional barrier. That is a form of voter suppression. Why is it that I can move $1 million on my cell phone, right? But I can't register to vote on my cell phone? There's something that we have to really be able to use our discernment and recognize that all of these little infractions, all of these new rules are part of a larger strategy to shave off votes here, there, and get a different kind of outcome.
It's so interesting you say all this and you show the tactics, because meanwhile, you'd think watching cable news, there was voter fraud everywhere, and that undocumented people were voting and they were crossing the border just because they need a vote. That's what they want to do. They are moving up through Central America, escaping really extreme situations in many cases to pay their life savings and take out loans to pay coyotes and go through dangerous routes, all to get to the border and potentially get arrested just because they want to vote. That's what they make it sound like. So let's get to the bottom of this. Is voter fraud, the reality is, I think we all know here, voter fraud is almost like, it doesn't even basically occur. It's like under 1%. And it's usually, some sort of misregistration. But you're here, you're the expert. Help us understand what's really happening.
What's really interesting, I think we need to be honest about this. This is just not about a political moment. This is really about a moment around, are we going to choose peace going forward? That ultimately, if there was a real concern about voter fraud, when Donald Trump called to Georgia and said to find 11,000 votes, why was that not? Why are people okay with that? Why are his supporters still okay with that? So we know we know that voter fraud is not the real issue. It's literally a dog whistle. There's a dog whistle around. The Republicans and the Republican parties have literally been taken over by MAGA, and as they've been taken over by MAGA, and they've used this strategy to try to figure out how they can actually get an outcome of an election. It is not even 0.5% in terms of what a 0.00004%, I think, around voter fraud. There is no voter fraud that we're seeing in this nation. But what we are seeing is we're seeing the voter fraud that, if you want to call it voter fraud, you can call it voter suppression. We're seeing that just this year alone, there have been over 350 bills all across the country that have been introduced in states to actually make it more difficult for people to vote. In order to have a strong democracy, you have to have an engaged electorate. For us, we're literally, of the developed countries, we have one of the lowest voting turnout rates in the world. Why is that? By some, that is really by design. But the truth of the matter is, every single one of us, we are touched literally by public policy. And public policy is made by people, elected officials that we put in office. And so if every one of us, we have agency and we have the right, it is our right to be able to weigh in on decisions being made about ourselves and our families. And we have to accept it as so. And we also have to really, when we see these things and it seems like it's harmless, part of what has happened is literally those of us who have been fighting and supporting and saw this happening around the stripping of the Voting Rights Act, that initially, I remember when the first rule changes that came out immediately was literally dealing with the voter ID. that seemed harmless. What it became an opening, a gateway for other voter suppression. That, oh, if you give a little inch in this space, that what we start seeing it being accelerated. We also start seeing a drop off in terms of people being able to participate in the election. We also start seeing challenges. And so when will it end? We have to stop it at the bud. We have to nip this in the bud. That's why those of us, we who believe in freedom, have to literally fight to make sure that, one, we participate in this election. I'm calling it, we need 10 to win. You got to get 10 people out, inform them, tell them to watch this film and get out and vote. The second thing, we have to literally be diligent about demanding that we restore the Voting Rights Act and elect the Freedom to Vote Act and support for the Freedom to Vote Act.
Latasha, I mean, if you love Latasha's passion, wait till you see her in the film, because she's in the film, Latasha Brown, Woman of the Year 2021. Now you see why. Thank you so much for giving us a nice history, motivation, what to do. 10 people, I'm on it. 10 people, 4 got to watch the film. Try to get all 10 to watch the film, but I've got family in swing states. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get off here and call them right away. Latasha Brown, thank you so much for your advocacy and your organizing.
Thank you. It takes 10 to win. Let's do it.
I love it. All right, now let's watch a clip from Vigilantes Inc. on how the far right is passing regressive laws to whitewash history and push the regressive agenda.
Governor Brian Kemp is preparing to sign a number of bills into law that will impact every student across the state.
Yeah, it does a few things here. It would speed up the process to ban books, make it easier
House Bill 1084 bans the teaching of divisive concepts. It ensures all of our state and nation's history is taught accurately.
No child in Georgia will have to learn that the Klan elected their governors. No child in Georgia will have to learn that Mr. Kemp's wealth came from Africans brought here in chains. Or watch this film in school. Kemp was not the first to threaten teachers for teaching history.
As president, I was proud to issue the world's first ban on critical race theory in September of 2020.
Which Biden revoked his first day in office. Following Georgia, other states are passing so-called divisive concept laws. Notably, states that passed new vote suppression laws.
All right, remember you can watch this film for free at saveyourvote.org or gregpalast.com. You want to stick around because we still have a few great interviews. We have the famous Tom Hartman, who's going to be joining us in a bit, and Rosario Dawson, who you just heard as narrator, is going to be sharing a message to us as well. But first up, we have Mondale Robinson. He is a passionate advocate for voter engagement and empowerment. He serves as the mayor of Enfield, North Carolina, and is the founder of the Black Male Voter Project, which works to increase participation among Black men in the electoral process. Mondale, thank you so much for joining us. I got to ask you, I didn't know, but you're in an undisclosed location as the mayor. Can you just give us a little backstory on that, and we'll get into some of the work you've been doing, because this is alarming.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the reason I'm hiding right now has a connection to what it means to be a Black man in America, with the point of view that is anti-status quo, anti-whiteness, anti-white supremacy. When I first got elected mayor Enfield, North Carolina, back in 2022, one of the first thing I did was get the board to vote on removing a statue from our park. That statue was over 10 feet tall, with a beautiful poem to the Confederacy, with a huge Confederate flag. With on one side of the statue, it had a white-only fountain that used to be functional in my mother's life. So as someone who has studied what it means to suffer from epigenetic trauma, the studies done on our Jewish brothers and sisters and how they suffer from, even if they did not experience the Holocaust themselves, I could imagine, and I know through lived experience, what it means to suffer through that. So I had to get rid of that statue, not just for me, not just for my mother's past, but before every Black child that needed to walk and play in that space going forward now and in the future. So I tore the statue down. And when I tore the statue down, I think the one thing I did do was underestimate what it means to be a Black mayor in a town that used to be a sundown town and how white supremacy still existed. So when I hear people talk about the rise or the rebirth of white supremacy, my experience reminds me that it never left. And some of the death threats I got was from this thing called the Invisible Empire. And for people that don't know this, the Invisible Empire is the new name of the Klan. So what happened was the same chapter of the KKK, the Loyal White Knights, which is the largest chapter in the country that play in Charlottesville, actually doxed me. And some scary people found out where I was living. So I had to, you know, be a mayor, but also get out of town every time the meetings are over. And now I just move around to different spaces in the country.
Oh my God. That's I had no idea that this organization rebranded itself. I mean, this is so I mean, like, how do you as a mayor function? You're just going in for meetings and leaving, and is law enforcement involved at all? This is alarming.
I mean, listen, the history of law enforcement in this country is that of slave catchers. So I wouldn't even feel comfortable with the idea of having police as security. We have private security that follows me when I go to town and then I leave. So I don't announce when I'm coming to town. I'm in and I take different routes out, and I'm out as soon as the meeting's over, which means I'm spending, you know, hours of my time on the road to get to and from North Carolina to wherever I'm at any given time. It is tragic, but it's also a reminder that, you know, those of us who do this work are not blinded by the myths of perspective that are spent on TV, and pop culture, and from the pundits that, you know, are paid so much and are missing what's really ailing Black people, and in my case specifically Black men, and the work that we do to reach those brothers through the electoral process and bring them onto this process.
Just to pivot a little bit, this election, North Carolina is back in the mix. And when it is back in the mix, of course, you're going to see dirty tricks and all sorts of organizing happening from the folks who do want to suppress Black voters and people of color and women. What are you hearing right now, seeing in North Carolina? You know, we've talked about Georgia, Texas, Arizona. What have you been seeing?
Yeah, so Black Male Voter Project does very little. While North Carolina is one of our states, it's not one of our states where we spend most of our time. Our headquarters is in Atlanta, Georgia. We are in Georgia because Georgia has more Black men registered to vote than any other state in this country. We don't have the most Black people, that would be Texas, but the most Black men registered is in Georgia. That's why our headquarters there. And we work in 17 states across this country. And what we're doing, what we're seeing is, I'm getting some feedback from somebody. So you might want to mute yourself, Justin. What I'm actually doing is there are two groups of Black men, how we see them in this country. There are those who are super voters, meaning brothers who vote in every election or damn near every election. And then there are the brothers who don't see themselves in the electoral process. And that population makes up the majority of Black men. That are over 60% of the 9.6 million Black men that are registered voting in this country that have not voted in 4 of the last 4 elections. These brothers have been written off, called non-voters, called selfish, called apolitical, called apathetic, and nobody, and I'm not even pretending that that number is not enough. Nobody is reaching these brothers with policies and programs that actually address what they've been suffering from, not just them, but their grandfathers and their grandfathers' grandfathers. Because since the passage of the 15th Amendment, Black men have been suffering from 3 things that keep them from the poll tax, literacy test, and the threat of death. And I would argue that none of those things are gone right now. Black men are more likely to be suspended or expelled from school. We're the least likely to have a college degree. Only 22% of Black men in this country have college degrees. I would say that is a literacy test in itself. I would say the fact that Black men are underemployed or unemployed more than anybody in this country is itself a poll tax or or the threat of death, we have the shortest life of anybody in this country, and not just in this country. You have to go to places like Afghanistan to find people with shorter lives than black men. So imagine being hungry, not I'm about to go in my refrigerator hungry, not I need to get home and cook something hungry, but hungry not knowing where the food is. Imagine being cold, not I need to turn up the heat in my car or in my house cold, but I'm homeless and don't know if these clothes are enough to protect me cold. And then somebody coming to talk to you about voting and volunteering. That is the stupid state we find ourselves when we talk about how black men don't participate in our elections, when we've not showed them how democracy could actually be a tool to address all the things that are plaguing us. And I think those are the failures of the system that we point fingers on black men about not participating in a process that don't show us that it is a tool or meant to be a tool to address what's ailing us. And we have over 405 years of a track record of politics not working for black men. And then we blame black men for not seeing ourselves in the political process. So what I'm hearing is brothers don't see an electoral system that's working to address what's ailing them. And I think, and until we get rid of this transactional nature of showing up, raising billions of dollars in an election season and doing nothing to address black men needs when it's not a political campaign to be ran, then we're not going to see a dent in this 60% of black men who are not participating in a regular way. So at Black Male Voter Project, we're trying to not just see or hear what brothers are saying during election season. We're trying to make brothers visible year round and not point fingers at them or make them the visible or blame misogyny when there are real issues with brothers asking, why don't politics work for me and why should I vote? Not hearing the truth in that question is to be naive and also ahistorical from a black man's perspective.
You bring up so many important points here, and I can't help but think about the Clinton crime bill that put 1 out of 3 black men in jail, and how so many black men after getting out weren't able to go home in some cases, weren't able to get jobs. So you have these systemic issues that have been, the groundwork has been laid for decades at this point. And then, you're in many communities, they're underserved. I mean, we could go through the list of different issues that are affecting folks. So if you're already struggling, as you said, for food and you're cold and, finding proper, jobs that are available to you, and then you have these other systemic issues that have targeted black and brown communities. Yeah, I mean, it does seem very hard to make the case that you got to drop everything and go vote for somebody who maybe that party hasn't been there for them. One thing that is kind of clear right now, and it's not a lot, but there does seem to be a little bit of peeling off of black male vote from the MAGA movement. And I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the messaging that is resonating, that's getting MAGA to peel some folks off and pull away from potentially the first black woman president?
Yeah, I think, listen, I want to ground this conversation in a couple truths. The first one is Donald Trump is magical in making people believe stuff that's not true. This is one of these narratives. There's no historical backing or anything. I'm talking about data-wise. There's tons of conversations and polls that say that black men are becoming more conservative, but there's no historical data when it comes to election to show that black men are becoming more conservative. And actually, if you look at, since Donald Trump has come on the scene, if you look at what's going on, black men are actually becoming more progressive. Donald Trump got less of black men vote in 2020 than he did in 2016, right? Black men in 2022 joined black women and outperformed white people for the first time in the history of this country for ideas that are progressive, right? Black men in 2023 showed the world that we don't just support or vote for our own issues. We vote for other people's issues. We are some of the best allies in this country, because in Ohio, when it wasn't a national election, but when our sisters, our mothers, and our wives and friends, ideas were on the ballot, when lives were on the ballot, black men outperformed everybody, including black women, for women's right to choose, right? Women's right to own what happens to their body. Black men outperform black women by 8 percentage points. 88% of black men, 80% of black women, and no other demographic was close. We even voted more for women's right to choose in Ohio than we did for the legalization of marijuana. So this idea that Donald Trump is killing off black men is grounded in a couple things. One is the history of America's long suffering, or being comfortable with the long suffering of black men and not being in an intimate relationship with black men, and just allowing other people to speak on our behalf, because our voting habits, the way we show up have shown that we are not a conservative bloc. There's no way in hell we are becoming more conservative when we continue to show up the way we do. We just saw a poll from ABC that says exactly what Black Male Voter Project has been saying since Donald Trump came on the scene. Black men right now are outperforming for Kamala than they did for Joe Biden right now. This is what we're showing, but nobody's covering that, because there's this narrative that needs to be painted that black men are somehow attracted to the nastiness that is Donald Trump. Black men are misogynistic to the point that they will not support a black woman. When every time a black woman name has been on the ballot for progressive ideas, the only people voting for or voting more for black women than black men are black women themselves. So there's no allies better for black women than black men, yet and still that is not the narrative that this country needs to paint. They need to make us continue to be the scary black man, like we saw in Vigilantes, that was double stacking the ballot, even though that was a white man in black skin. So these words are just the same. It is white man's word, Donald Trump saying in February of 2020 that he was going to get 20% of the black man vote. And then all of a sudden there were a bunch of polls to support this nonsense. And then when the election happened, it wasn't true. Then we saw in 2020, this election cycle, Donald Trump did the same thing, except for this time, he said he's going to get 25% of the black men vote. And now they're opposed to support it, even though there are no voting data to support this behavior. And we saw this trope get pushed by Barack Obama too, saying that black men need to check themselves, when in actuality, there's no point of checking except for the ballot box as proof. And black men are turning up and turning out for this sister just like we did, and probably at record rates even higher than we did for him in 2012.
Mayor Mondale Robinson, thank you so much for the work you're doing, for fact-checking the media, fact-checking the polls, fact-checking all the assumptions. Very honored, and stay safe while you're doing the work out there.
All right, peace.
Okay, so before we watch another clip from Vigilantes Inc., we have a special message from the one and only Rosario Dawson.
Hi, I'm Rosario Dawson. I'm so proud to have helped narrate Greg Palast's film Vigilantes. I'm also a co-founder of Voto Latino, which I launched in 2004 to empower young Latinos to engage politically by registering to vote and participating in elections. Now, Vigilantes Inc. is such an important film because it exposes the extremist movement to not only target the most vulnerable communities, but also cheat to win elections. That's why it's crucial to check your voter registration, vote early if you can, so that they can't just force a provisional ballot on you instead, which may not count. We've made this film free for everyone, so please share the link at saveyourvote.org with everyone that you know, especially in battleground states. There's so much at stake, but if we all do our part, we can protect our democracy. Let's show up, stay engaged, and make every vote count. And in Texas, the vigilantes got violent.
He said, help me, with his hand inside his coat. Then when I tried to help him, he pulls out a gun. That is when I was told to get on the ground.
Court records show Aguirre believed Zuniga was driving his work truck around with 750,000 illegal ballots inside. When police got to the scene, they found air conditioning parts inside. No illegal ballots.
The accusation was that I masterminded this scheme to go and forge all of these mail-in ballots.
At 8 seconds each, it'd be about, about 200 years to do that. So it's amazing. You forged all those ballots. So tell me about how you forged the ballots.
First of all, I'm too lazy to sign hundreds of thousands of ballots. I'd be nuts. A vigilante stopped this air conditioning repair guy, said that he was a police officer, had the guy on the ground, telling him open up the truck, had his pistol out on the guy. I mean, I can imagine how terrorized he was.
The gunman was not a lone wolf. He was one of dozens of armed vigilantes hired by an election-denying billionaire.
Was arraigned on felony charges of unlawful restraint and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in connection with a badly botched, privately bankrolled investigation of alleged election fraud.
There were people outside my home with signs one day saying, "Stop the steal." So one idiot is out there with a rifle on his shoulder. So no, there's a real fear of it. I take the security now. It's a real concern. I mean, the level of vitriol out there is just amazing.
Ellis was a target because, during COVID, the commissioner was about to mail out ballots to all voters in Houston. He was blocked by the Texas Attorney General, who crowed that.
Harris County mail-in ballots that they wanted to send out were 2.5 million, and we were able to stop every one of them. Had we not done that, Donald Trump would have lost the election.
All right. Well, our next guest is the renowned talk show host and author, known for his insightful commentary on politics and society. He is the host of The Thom Hartmann Show, a favorite here on Free Speech TV. And he has written extensively, including The Hidden History of the American Dream, The Demise of the Middle Class, and How to Rescue Our Future, the Thom Hartmann Hidden History series, which I love. I have them on my bookshelf. They're great. They're short. They're like, you can read it in a day. It's like great Saturday activity. Thom, thank you for always teaching us our history, and welcome to this program.
Thanks, Tamiki. It's great to be here with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Let me give you an opportunity. Tell us a little bit about your new book.
Well, the new book is The Hidden History of the American Dream, and it's about how basically Reaganism set out to, and a conservative movement that brought it to power, and a group of right-wing billionaires basically set out to gut the American middle class. It explains why when Reagan came to power, 2/3 of us were in the middle class, and today it's 43% of us. It explains why when my generation was in our 30s, we controlled 21% of the nation's wealth, and the generation currently in their 30s control 4.6% of the nation's wealth. It explains why there's been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the homes, checking accounts, savings accounts, retirement accounts of working class people into the money bins of the top 1%, and what we can do about it.
It's clear that somebody is funding this movement right now that is leading up to Election Day. You've been a big supporter of Greg Palast's film Vigilantes Inc., which we've been showing clips of. I assume there's some sort of connection between the folks that you've been writing about and what's happening on the ground. So can you explain to us why you're so passionate about the film and why you're so passionate about investigating these ultra wealthy that are clearly controlling our political elections at this point?
Well, I've known and admired Greg and his work for decades. And 2 years ago, I wrote a book called The Hidden History of the War on Voting. And Greg's work featured prominently in the book. Greg has always been an inspiration to me. I have such respect for him. And it's, and to your point about, the money behind all this, the same billionaires who are funding efforts to lower taxes and to bring Republicans into power are also in many cases funding these lies about voter fraud. This is a seminal lie. This is a lie that the Republicans really got going. And it started weakly in the 1960s with the 1960 election, when Republicans claimed that Mayor Daley had thrown voting machines into the Chicago River that held ballots for Richard Nixon. In fact, had Kennedy lost Illinois, he still would have won the election. If there was hanky-panky, it was probably in Texas. But in any case, that kind of went on. And then in '64, you had the rise of, in a big way, of Operation Eagle Eye, which really William Rehnquist was a big part of. This was his entree into Republican politics, which took him all the way to being Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. And, he's the guy who handed George W. Bush the presidency in 2000, even though Al Gore won in Florida. So we have this group of billionaires who have been funding these lies for years and years and years, and the Republican Party has been relying on them aggressively, and as has the Supreme Court. I mean, in 1993, maybe it was 97, I'm pretty sure it was 93, we passed the so-called Motor Voter Act, the National Voter Registration Act. And that law, both in its preamble and in the body of the law itself, says that voting is a right in America. Nonetheless, in 2000, the Supreme Court ruled that voting is not a right. I think it's bizarre here in the United States that if your government, if your state government wants to take away your gun because of Supreme Court decisions asserting that gun ownership is a right, they have to go to court and get a court order to remove your gun from your home. But if they want to take away your vote, they don't even need to tell you. They just do it. We really need to establish voting as a right in the United States. And I realize, like I just said, we've already done that at law once. We need to do it again. We need to do it emphatically, and we need to do it in a way that the Supreme Court can't overturn.
Tom, you said something interesting, which I've been thinking about over the last few weeks, as you've seen these, I guess you could say, patriotic Republicans that were very much propped up by these billionaires and wealthy elites, whether they're part of the Bush administration, as you mentioned, with William Rehnquist being part of Bush v. Gore. But seeing the Cheneys and, well-known Republicans who've been part of these institutions that have, their campaigns have been funded by them, their information, whether it's through think tanks, have been handed to them. The pundits on TV have been supported by them. And they've been splitting from this sort of MAGA, and I don't even go as far as MAGA, because there's a lot of billionaires supporting Donald Trump that are not MAGA, as we're seeing right now with, Jeff Bezos and LA Times and other folks. I guess what I'm confused by is, are these people having a change of heart? The patriotic, pro-democracy, although, what is democracy when the election of 2000 was definitely undemocratic? I'm just kind of confused where this split lies. And does it come down to, like, you're a Peter Thiel billionaire versus a more traditional, conservative billionaire? Is there some sort of unity, or what is the division there?
Well, I think part of the problem is that our wealth inequality in the United States has become so severe. We are the most unequal society among all developed nations on earth. And the billionaires who live among us, and even many of the multi-hundred millionaires, literally live in a separate world. They travel on private jets. They vacation on their own private yachts. They live in massive fortress-like compounds with live-in 24/7 security, and live-in cooks and live-in valets and masseuses and whatnot. And so they no longer feel any connection to the average American. I mean, back when Reagan came into office and in the years before, your average CEO in America only took 30 times what the average worker took. In many cases, they lived in communities where they were, accessible, and they were part of the community itself. That all changed in the 90s and the early 2000s in a big way as a result, mostly of Reagan's tax cuts and also his gutting unions. But I don't think that we can claim that the billionaire class is monolithic in the United States. I mean, there are some billionaires who are supporting Democrats as well as Republicans. But they're on the hard right, the billionaires who are funding these voter suppression efforts under the rubric of voter fraud, I think by and large are the true believers. They're the ones who believe that that democracy is really just mob rule, and they will tell you that it's a article of faith among libertarians. That you've got some of these billionaires who even come out and said women shouldn't be allowed to vote, that the country went to hell when the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920. Others arguing that only people who pay taxes, income taxes, which is only 47% of America, should be allowed to vote, things like that. So they just fundamentally have this kind of aristocratic worldview, this notion that the rabble really should not be playing a role in democracy. They echo, the famous book is The Conservative Mind by Russell Kirk. He published it in 1951, and the subtitle is From Burke to Eliot. And the Burke that he's talking about is Edmund Burke, who back during the American Revolution era, or during the French Revolution era, actually, he's a British conservative, famously said, probably his most famous quote, that, it does me no harm if a man is allowed to engage in a profession as servile as that of tallow maker or hairdresser, candle maker or hairdresser. But it does society considerable violence if such a man is allowed to participate in governance by voting. And that's that, you know, that's the subtitle. That guy is the subtitle of the book that is literally the Bible of the modern day conservative movement, Russell Kirk's Conservative Mind. So it shouldn't surprise us, I suppose, that the people who are the true believers, the hardcore, really are willing to, you know, fund this kind of a movement and get the ballot bandits out there, you know, the vigilantes out there, and fund the vigilante movement and the politicians that support it, because they really don't think that we should have the right to vote, at least not all of us.
So who are these true believers? Is it Elon Musk, who's on the campaign trail with Donald Trump right now? Is it Peter Thiel, or are those just folks who are riding along for the tax breaks or some other, you know,
yeah, I just don't know what's in these people's hearts. You know, certainly Elon Musk, he's been, the Biden administration is suing Tesla. They are suing SpaceX. EPA has gone after SpaceX. I mean, he's got a half a dozen regulatory actions against him right now that Trump has promised he'd make go away. So, you know, that might be the case. I don't know. I suspect Peter Thiel is more of a true believer, but I don't know him either. I really can't speculate as to their motives, but I do think that there are basically two kinds of billionaires who are supporting Trump. You've got the true believers, the hardcore true believers, and opportunists. And it's hard to disentangle those two, as I just mentioned. And then you've got the people who are just terrified of him. They're going along. I think Jeff Bezos probably falls into this category, and the guy who's the publisher of the Los Angeles Times. These are people who, you know, historically have been fans of liberal democracy, and now are to quote Timothy Snyder, obeying in advance, you know, which is something you should never do with fascists like Trump.
Obeying in advance, my gosh. So let's think after Election Day, no matter what happens. I mean, hopefully, you know, democracy really does prevail here, and I say lowercase democracy. Where does this movement go? Have they laid out their roadmap? We know Project 2025, but in terms of how they organize, what's next on the agenda if, say, Donald Trump were elected? I'm sure that's their fantasy, but if not, is there any sort of roadmap on what's in the future?
Well, this using voter fraud as an excuse to suppress the vote, particularly the vote of students, Black and brown people, and Social Security age voters. This goes, like I said, back to 1960, and arguably, you know, goes way before that. I mean, you know, it was as Greg points out in the movie, you know, it was used to suppress the Black vote after the Civil War. So that's not going to go away. Operation Eagle Eye is having a resurgence, as it were. You know, those kinds of programs, I think, are probably not going to leave us for a long time. They've got, you know, most of the Republican Party believing that they're true, and it's going to take a massive multi-year effort by both the media and the Democratic Party to puncture that belief that there are all these, you know, illegal voters or fraudulent voters. The infrastructure that has been built, particularly by the fossil fuel billionaires, you know, is huge. There are state policy organizations funded by right-wing billionaires in every single state. There's ALEC, the national one, where lobbyists get together with the Republican legislators, state legislators, and literally write laws for the states. The lobbyists write the laws, and the Republicans introduce them. There are think tanks, you know, from Heritage to you know, on and on it goes. You know, there's a whole bunch of them, and that's not going away. That's very, very well funded, in some cases even by foundation funding, which is not going to go away. So we're looking, I think, at the very least, a generational struggle against this massive anti-small d democratic wealth.
Generational struggle it is. I mean, this is, I think, why we're seeing the MAGA movement double down on younger male voters, while you know, I'm going to say the pro-democracy voters, because it seems like the Kamala Harris campaign is bipartisan at this point, are really leaning into women. Democracy is nonpartisan, and that's why we are talking about these issues. It's a shame that the far right has weaponized it, but it is nonpartisan, and I want to leave folks with some hope, because you mentioned generation, and I see these young women organizing, and I was talking to organizers on the ground a couple of days ago for an article, and I was shocked to hear how the organizers were saying 5 out of 5 women in their focus groups, the calls that they were doing, almost 100% were saying that they were showing up at the polls. And not to make it just about gender, but that did make me feel like there was something positive to look forward to. So what are you seeing? What kind of hope are you seeing for folks?
Well, I'm hearing, on my radio and TV program, I'm getting a lot of calls from women and allies, as it were, and people of color and allies who are saying we've had enough. We're not going back. We're not going to tolerate this BS, and we are committed to moving forward. And I think that's a really positive step. In some ways, the Trump presidency and the Trump candidacy, as much damage as they've done to America, have also taken the mask off, this mask of the friendly fascism mask that really began to emerge, arguably with the Goldwater candidacy in '64, but really took root with the Reagan presidency. And they can't BS their way out of this stuff anymore. We know who they are, and we know what they're up to.
Tom Hartman, it's always a great lesson listening to you, pull from history and remind us of where we've been. And that's why your series is just so great too, because it's very digestible. Appreciate you joining us, sharing your wisdom, supporting the film. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nomi.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a critical call to action. We want to please take your time to go watch the Vigilantes Inc. Film at saveyourvote.org and share it far and wide, please. As we said, 10 folks, just call 10 folks up, get them to the polls, 4 folks to watch the film. This isn't just for you, it's for your friends, your family, and especially those folks in those battleground states who need this information the most. The link is free to watch, and the film shines a crucial light on efforts to undermine our democracy. Make sure to check your voter registration today and create a plan to vote early. Do not rely on anyone else. Your voice matters, and if you encounter any issues at the polls, do not accept a provisional ballot unless it's your absolute last option. Also, there's a moveon.org petition demanding Congress certify this election. So go to moveon.org/certify election. And after all the votes are cast, we must demand that those results are certified by Congress, because this is a bigger issue than partisan politics. It's about protecting the very foundations of our democracy. I want to give a heartfelt thank you to all of our incredible guests and partners, act.tv, Free Speech TV, Black Voters Matter Fund, Black Male Voter Project, We and Goliath, Rainbow Push Coalition, MoveOn.org, Leonardo and George DiCaprio, Martin Sheen, Progressive Democrats of America, and every person out there doing the tireless work to defend our democracy. We have to stay engaged. We have to stay vigilant. Thank you all for watching. Now, let's go make that difference.
Hello, I'm Martin Sheen. Now, you may or may not be shocked to learn that there is a real threat to the 2024 election, but I can guarantee you will be shocked by the film you are about to see that exposes in no uncertain terms the full extent of that threat. The film is called Vigilantes Inc., and it follows the heroic investigative reporter Greg Palast as he uncovers a group of 40,000 MAGA volunteers whose efforts have already challenged the voting rights of 851,000 eligible voters with a goal of 2 million by November 5th. And nearly all of them are voters of color. Of course, all of this is just a new form of an old Jim Crow tactic first used in 1946 by the Ku Klux Klan to deny ballots to black voters. Only this time, they are using AI tricks and disinformation to deny ballots to blacks, Hispanics, and Asian American citizens. There is so little time left before the election, so I urge you to get involved by joining this heroic effort to expose voter suppression. And remember, one vote can change an election, and one heart with courage is a majority. Thanks again.
You're telling me 2000.
Hello, I'm Martin Sheen. Now,
You're telling me 2,600 miles away, 2 days for an election, that if I want to vote, all I have to do is show up? and prove as an American citizen that I have the right to vote again.
Is this an attempt to remove a lot of Democrats, black people from voting to win the election?
I am far from that, sir, and you have crossed the line.
And today to come out and not be able to vote and no one can give you an explanation, like, it's extremely emotional and it bothers me. It bothers me to my core.